And let me introduce my guest to you as we begin the show this morning. And I am very excited this morning to introduce to you Ace Annan Ankoma. He's a lawyer. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Also in the studio is Dr. Richmond, the Chairhene Banking and Corporate Governance Consultant. Doc, good morning and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Back here for the second time. Doc is returning for the third time on this banking matters. So back here for the second time, for as long as we have him in Ghana, because he's always out of the jurisdiction. Bright Simmons, he's Honorary Vice President of Imani Africa. Used to be Imani Ghana. Bright Simmons is member of the study group of the Center for Global Development in Washington, D.C. And he's member of the Africa Strategy Group of the World Economic Forum in Geneva. Okay, gentlemen, good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
Right.
Good morning.
So we're going to have three unique, separate perspectives. There's a reason I gave a little of a background to Bright Simmons, so that you know the worldview he brings to the discussion. Of course, Dr. Richmond Chairhene is no stranger to this debate on this platform. And you know he has a big question on the corporate governance aspects, and he repeats his comments about how funds are being tunneled in the name of whatever. This morning we'll hear him give us some other perspective. Well, Azanan he hates all his other degrees, I suspect, and all other all other descriptions, only to restrict us all the time to simply saying he's a lawyer. But guess what? This is the other perspective. There's this publication which I read just a small bit of it to give you what I'm going to say. Now, I pick a quote from the publication. It's not a local publication. And the publication says, quote, "The most dramatic moment in the dispute came in 2012 when Elliott made international headlines by attempting to take possession of an Argentine naval Navy vessel. The 338-foot ship, the Fragata Libertad, was reportedly hosting 110 naval cadets from several countries, 69 members of the Argentine Navy, and a crew of 220. As the ship settled into the largest berth in the port of Tema in Ghana, a man appeared on shore wielding an order for the ship to be impounded. Argentina's lawyers rushed to hire the best Ghanaian lawyer,
That's not true.
only to discover that he had already been retained by Elliott. Okay, so you'll hear him take you through what Uncle Ebo White says ought to be a template for the Registrar General to play every time any person approaches the Registrar General to register a company. It should be played to them to listen to first before they begin the process to register. All right. He's most uncomfortable with this, but I've done it. Now, let's go and take a listen to this one or two clips and views that were expressed on the matters that came up as far as the banking crisis is concerned. And then I return to the studio. My guests will have upwards of 15 minutes each to commence their discussions. And they will take time to give us their understanding and full appreciation of what has brought us to this point, particularly their understanding of the Bank of Ghana, reports, the Boulders reports, and the KPMG report on why we are where we are. 7 banks gone. We'll be right back.
The Bank of Ghana also recently established a new office called the Office of Ethics and Internal Investigation to strengthen good governance within the bank and to promote the highest standards of ethical conduct commensurate with the bank's mandate. We at the Ministry of Finance are sending, sort of a formal letter to BOG, really to look into their own internal processes. So at the end, and as much as possible, our duty is to ensure that no depositor loses out. We are determined at the Ministry of Finance to give all of the support required to build a robust Ghanaian banking framework. This clearly should not be about witch hunting, but about cleaning the system. There's no need to create panic in the economy. We have it under control. We are confident that we will be able to emerge out of this much stronger and more robust sense of financial services in this country. The law, of course, must take its due course, but our interest fundamentally protect these jobs, protect depositors, and the most important pillar of the economy, the financial industry. We cannot let it go.
All these things that we are talking about are based on the KPMG report, of which a big disclaimer has been put. Okay. So now I don't have evidence to support that what KPMG is saying is correct or not. All right? Because 1, a copy of the report was also given to me. 2, these things were going on all along. A report was sent.
If these things had happened, Prof, would you believe that the Bank of Ghana has taken the right decision by
Of course, if this thing has happened, and really happened, then the Bank of Ghana would have taken a right decision.
In what it is? And the Bank of Ghana considered, the caveats that we read, the caveat that we keep referring to, it says that this document must be read in that context.
Yes.
And then the Bank of Ghana said that we have read the document. From our reading of the document, this is the best decision.
Yeah, but
so we can safely assume the Bank of Ghana read it in that context, and took the decision.
What was the context?
The context that some of the information given had not been verified. However, some of the information given had been checked with. I don't know what the definition of verified is, to be honest, in that. But you are telling me that with you, for instance, they checked with you. I don't know if that constitutes as a verification, but they checked with you and you gave them a response.
In their case.
Exactly. And so we can safely assume it was done in a number of cases.
That's when they checked.
Yes.
That's when they checked. And I gave them the response. That's when they checked. But for others, I don't know. That if what Bank of Ghana is saying, based on KPMG's report, is true, all right, is true, then I'm surprised.
Isn't it your job as the board to make sure that things like this don't happen?
But if they don't come to the notice of the board,
no, but that's the point. You see, that is the question.
Yeah, how can we know?
I am asking that. Is it not?
Something is happening. That is, management is undertaking certain activity or certain action that is concealed from the board. All right, or concealed from the Bank of Ghana, because they sent a report. The Bank of Ghana come for supervision and those things, and every month they sent a report to the Bank of Ghana. The same report that they sent to the Bank of Ghana are the same report that they sent to us. Okay, at the end of the year, our external auditor comes, they audit and so they don't raise any issue. So how can board members know that the management is concealing A, B, C things from it?
Conflicts. There are various issues of conflicts and moral hazards. I mean, if I was a regulator, you understand what I'm saying, I might decide to withhold somebody's license because he came and showed me his business plan and he was going to do the same type of banking that I would like to do when I leave. And so therefore I might impede his progress or refuse him a license and then turn around and use his same business plan once I get out of the bank to set up my own bank. And it's happened before in the past.
So how do you address it going forward?
You put it in the law. I think right now it's there. I think, if you're a governor, you can't own a bank or be a shareholder in a bank for 5 years after you leave the governorship.
We don't need another law. We need men and women to enforce the law. Some of what I've seen is shocking. As I read them, I cannot believe it. But guess what? It has happened. And many of us might look at it and say, oh, they were just smart. Our law says you can't be that smart with depositors' funds. But I'll end with a caveat. Let's not rush the Bank of Ghana. I know enough to know that white-collar issues and white-collar crimes are some of the most difficult to prosecute. If you make a mistake and you lose one, you've lost your mojo. So watch Mueller and what he's doing in the US, slowly, very slowly. But when he hits, he files 18 charges, knowing that even one can take you to jail for 10 years. And by the time the jury brings the verdict, at least 8. And so you begin to multiply. The 70-year-old may be in jail for about 10 years. And because it's a federal crime, at least he must serve 80% of it. And so let's allow Ghana's Mullahs a little bit of space and time. But they too, they should hurry up small. Yes, let's have a public inquiry. I am scandalized that any member of parliament would dare suggest to the people of Ghana that the inquiry into this issue should be held in camera. And you know the excuse he gave? Sikampe rough. They have done rough with our money. Let's find out what rough they have done. You want to go and do it in secret. Can the people of Ghana tell Parliament that if you dare touch this issue, we want live TV coverage, and we don't want parliamentarians coming there to protect their friends like they do at the Public Accounts Committee?
I am one who supports regulatory work. I wish that here in Ghana, the regulator would be given more resources, will have more technology, and all sorts of other resources so that they can do regular work. When I say regular work, there's a difference between regular work and what I call control work. The other side is where the regulator helps on a regular basis, offers roundtables, offers advice, provides resources, does all sorts of things so that the banks, they become strengthened. So all of the things that are going on, that is my contribution, is let us strengthen the regulator so that they can help the banks become strengthened. And if the banks are going to become, they will be strengthened, then it is the newer banks, which happen also to be Ghanaian banks, that need that sort of support.
That the economy, the Ghanaian economy, is so small to be able to take mega banks. We need small to medium scale banks to be able to mop up the liquidity. We don't have a huge economy. And so to try to raise the minimum capital from 120 million to over 400 million is to give a policy that will be creating mega banks. Since Ghanaians don't have the money, you cannot get that capital in such a small economy. You simply opening up your banks to foreign capture. It meant that we are asking the bankers to go outside Ghana to mobilize the minimum capital. And therefore, foreigners will come to invest in our banks, take control of our banks. And you know, when your banking sector is captured by foreigners, they control your economy.
You're welcome back. And so much of what you heard earlier was bits of what had happened at the Dankwa Institute forum that was held in the course of the week, where the finance minister and then a deputy, as well as Ace Nkrumah, were and spoke together with Clara Berry on the issues. And then, of course, you have heard others share views. Dr. Papa Kwesi Indum, who also runs, a bank with many branches in the country, and another out of the country in the United States of America, and his suggestions that he has to make. And then Alban Bagbin. Okay, Bagbin literally translates dog's tail. In our part of Ghana, I don't know why they give some names, but it's interesting, isn't it? Right. Now, We will look at the mechanics of forming and running a company, duties and liabilities of shareholders, directors, etc. We'll look at the general trends of the failures, including corporate governance leading to the problems giving rise to the collapse of the banks. And then we'll look at the effects of the Bank of Ghana decisions so far on banking and the financial sector and the economy at large, as we have panic withdrawal hit the institutions. If you have followed the Joy Business Report, for example, in the course of the week, you would glean clearly, unless you are not related to somebody who has directly informed you about the development. And it's not that we have decided to scare anybody. It is the truth and the reality of what is happening. Some of the finance institutions have actually gone out. They have vanished. There's one somewhere by the Exim Guarantee in the airport area. The clients went there and the office building, the signage was taken away. All the branding for that entity was taken away. That's Ascent Financial Services was taken away. And then the building itself is being advertised for, potential tenants. Then we know some finance institutions that have taken decisions, including to downsize. So there are going to be job losses. We know others that run subsidiaries that are presently collapsing those subsidiaries. They are not interested in running them anymore because of the constraints and the difficulties they find themselves. Now, here is the truth. Investors, local or whatever, have been running to some of the institutions and banks demanding their monies be given to them back in full. It doesn't matter how much the amount is. They are demanding full refund of their investment capital or deposits. What that means is that it's bringing such a strain on these institutions, including some of the banks. If you have checked also, the banks for the first time are running, adverts and news items in the national dailies telling people or the public that some are saying they are able to get to raise the minimum capital, the new minimum capital, and it is for good reason. Because if they don't do that, people do not have the assurance that they will be able to get it. And if they don't, they might also run into trouble. And then some are also telling the public that they are okay. People shouldn't come and take their money away from them because there are no problems with them. Some of them really true, but some of them not exactly true. So let's start this way, and that's what we are doing this morning, dedicated absolutely and wholly to these matters. So we'll start with Bright. You heard him last week. He made an attempt to look at the issue in the broader picture, looking at the various reports, but he was unable to do it because we didn't have sufficient time. So Bright has about 15 minutes from this point to tell us his appreciation of the Boulders report, of the KPMG and the Bank of Ghana's own, verdict on why the 7 banks have gone down. He will do that without any interruptions. When he's done, Ace will also give us his perspective, and then Dr. Chiahene will do so. After that, we'll launch into the other matters that ought to be looked at. So, Bright.
Thanks, Samson. Very simple. Over the last couple of years, it's become evident that the reporting of banks to the authorities have not been above board. That is why we've seen a situation where just early this year, we're suggesting that non-performing loans in the system was just about 8 billion. And then upon the resolution of a couple of banks, purchase and assumption thereafter, we are being told that one bank alone has a capital deficit of 7-point-something billion. So it's quite evident that the financial data in the system is almost unreliable. That's number one. And it's about time that the Bank of Ghana undertook a comprehensive review of financial data upon which it is relying to regulate the financial sector in this country, particularly the banking sector in this country. So that's number one. Number two, we've seen over the last couple of years also a number of trends which have accelerated the risks that are present in our financial system. Some of it are structural, dating back to as far back as independence, in the sense that financial intermediation in this country has been left almost entirely to banks. So private equity is very marginal. Pension funds have been weak. Until recent reforms, pension funds were more or less left in the hands of the government. SNAIT was heavily underperforming. We have allowed it to squander the inheritance of so many people who have contributed to SNAIT. You go to the United States where pension funds are up to $10 trillion. That's 80% or so, nearly 70% or so of GDP. We have a situation where banks are being relied upon to fund risky ventures that elsewhere are done by venture capital funds. We have a situation where banks in this country are themselves sustaining holding companies that are investing in highly illiquid assets in a manner completely inconsistent with traditional banking. So the question is that in a situation where the financial intermediation system is so shallow and banks are being called upon to act in ways that in other economies typically are reserved for other types of institutions, you have a clear risk that builds up when those banks then also don't follow the law. Act 930 is very clear. So let's use an example. If your capital adequacy ratio falls below the prescribed limits by the Bank of Ghana, you are not supposed to take interinstitutional placements. What has happened and what has been confirmed by the Bank of Ghana is that this was happening consistently. We have a situation where because lending rates are in the low 30s and government liquidity support rates are in the mid-20s, somebody can simply run their bank by taking money from the government and investing in the open market and making a return. What then is the banking, the purpose of the bank? What is the real intermediation happening? Taking from savers and giving to investors. What is the point when it appears as if the central bank has become the lead financier of banks' assets on an ongoing basis? What kind of structural banking system allows that to persist for so long? When it was evident that some of these banks could not borrow on the interbank market, when it was evident that correspondent banks overseas would not relate to these banks, when it was evident that financial equity, private equity and VCs who had looked at some of these banks and intended to put in money could no longer do so, it must have been evident to the central bank that chronic provision of liquidity support was not acceptable. Banks are supposed to borrow on the interbank market for their short-term needs and their medium-term needs. The Bank of Ghana as a central bank is the lender of last resort. It cannot become the lender of first resort, which in many instances it had become. Because it was quite evident that some of these banks did not even have the confidence of the rest of the financial system in order to borrow from them. Of course, the law says if your adequacy is heavily impaired, then don't go and take loans from other financial institutions in order to reduce systemic risk and contagion. But that therefore means that the Bank of Ghana at many points in time in the past, in the recent past, was clear in its mind because it was receiving these reports of requests for emergency support constantly, that we had a permanent emergency. Yes, you have a permanent emergency because every time that, every moment the banks feel put upon, they go to the lender of last resort. But if the lender of last resort has become almost the perpetual relief that they all look up to, then quite clear there was something structurally wrong. We've also had instances where, or rather not instances, we've had a trend, an ongoing trend, where the Bank of Ghana's policy measures do not appear to be sufficiently coherent. So at the same time that they were promoting asset review and clearly were seeing evidence that banks were incapable of deploying their capital productively and profitably, they were aggressively promoting asset inflation through high minimum paid up capital, which we have to make very clear is not the same thing as capital adequacy. Capital adequacy is linked to the quality of your assets as a bank. So if I loan, if I spend 100% of all, if I'm allowed, obviously I'm not allowed, but if I spend 100% of all my capital on government treasury bills, and government treasury bills, like almost everywhere else, is almost risk-free. And in those instances, you are doing risk weighting, and therefore the weight you apply to it is extremely stable in terms of your judgment of the degree of risk. I am very different from a bank that has invested 100% of its capital in the real estate industry. I'm also very different from a bank that has invested 100% of its capital in agriculture. In those instances, our assets do not have the same risk profile. And therefore, the capital that I need to provision in order to remain in business cannot be equal. It's obvious, right? So in those instances, why do you then prescribe high minimum paid up capital in a blanket manner across the industry, and have had a policy over time which has taken us from $750,000 minimum paid up capital to the point where we are hitting $90 million by the end of this year, over a few decades? Some people say we have too many banks. Singapore has 200 banks. 200 banks. What is the population of Singapore? Of course, that's a bigger economy, but that is the point. If there are small banks that are willing to operate to the extent of their maximum, let them operate as small banks. You go to Switzerland, you have all these private banks, they only focus on high net worth individuals, highly de-risked prospects. And they specialize by hiring people who are effective in managing the assets of these high net worth individuals. That's what they focus on. Why would you want such a bank to have minimum paid up capital of $1 billion? We've also heard arguments that, well, if you can't operate as a bank because you cannot find the $90 million, then go down to a lower tier, become a savings and loan bank. There are very different strategies that are relevant and effective in that tier of banking. Because savings and loans banks struggle to mobilize call deposits, invariably they are operating in a kind of intermediation that focuses on medium-term opportunities. Banks that have access to large volumes of call deposits, particularly the legacy or some might call the premium banks in this country, have lower cost of funds. The reason why a lot of these financial institutions are interested in progressing to becoming banks is because there are clear privileges associated with that layer that ties into other strategies that may be relevant in that domain of banking. So it's not everybody that's going to fit into a banking tier where high cost of funds is generally the dominant feature. So if you have a strategy that does not allow you to accommodate high cost of funds, you cannot safely operate as a savings and loans company in this country. That is why the banks that have transitioned from savings and loans into orthodox banks, so to speak, or tier 1 banks or universal banks, whatever you want to call them, have struggled. They have struggled because they are coming from a legacy context where their cost of funds were very high. And they move into a context where they are supposed to reduce their cost of funds, but because they are new banks, they are unable to attract cheap capital. And then they find out that because they are competing at that level with banks that can lend lower than 30%. So just check historically, all the banks that are under pressure today, what was their average lending rate compared to the industry or benchmark with the industry? You find out that the average lending rates were very high, offering the low 30s. Why? Because their cost of funds were high. Some were borrowing at 25% from the Bank of Ghana for their day-to-day operations. Some were mobilizing capital at 30%. So it's clear that the savings and loan segment, that entire segment, is for banks or for financial institutions that are investing in areas where returns must be extremely high. The person that is borrowing the money must be making returns of over 100% in order for them to pay interest rates of over 40%, in order for that institution to also go and pay their investors over 30%. It's a very distinct category of the banking sector. The universal banking sector category is for blue chip type of investments, relatively safer type of investment, longer term, investments and the rest of it. And where we don't have private equity, you don't have pension funds, you don't have all these other types of financial institutions in the system, then the banks in that particular category must play some of these long-term development financing needs that we have. So we cannot have a situation where we assume that all of those banks must have large asset bases. That they must, because if you have $100 million dollars in paid up capital, in order for your return on equity to maintain your return on equity, you need to have a huge asset base. And then you have to ensure that within that asset base, you have significant amounts of performing loans. Do we have an economy that is capable of absorbing these investments, particularly from the banking sector, when a lot of the funding needs in manufacturing, for instance, are 15-year patient capital and the rest of it? So my argument is that there's incoherence at the very core of the Bank of Ghana's agenda. And that has had a problem. And it's a structural problem that's been going for a long time. If you look at some of the issues that have come up, and I hope you are going to discuss the matters that uniBANK has raised in the last week, it was evident that the Bank of Ghana, and here I'm talking about enforcement rather than policy, it's evident that we have a new regime in the Bank of Ghana as far as enforcement is concerned, and that the quality of enforcement has improved significantly. It's evident. It must be matched by policy. Because if you say, to give an example, non-performing loans and the classifications of assets must be adhered to based on the directives of the Bank of Ghana as already extant. If you make that argument, then it's also incumbent on the Bank of Ghana to prescribe policy as far as banking prudency, as far as banking supervision is concerned, that does not itself spare the accumulation of non-performing loans.
Okay.
So it's linked. So you want to enforce classification properly. You want to enforce provisions. If there is doubtful loans, 50% provision, etc., etc. Even if you can recover, but it's quite clear that maturity has passed, loans has not been serviced, write it off by 100% and still pursue your recovery. Make your provisions. You cannot at the same time then continue to promote policies, such as continued use of chronic liquidity support for all manner of banks, which is still continuing, by the way, which spares risky casino-type banking. At the same time as you are arguing that classification of loans should improve. So some of the attitudes of the Bank of Ghana in the policy domain is not consistent with this new stance on enforcement. And that's very critical as well. We also have a situation where, for a while now, we've continued to treat government borrowing, government lending, government facilities as sovereign. And here is where another area where I have significant difficulties with the way that the Bank of Ghana has structured its interventions come up. We are promoting Basel principles, Basel 1, Basel 2, Basel 3. The truth of the matter is that some of those principles rely on conventions which we've not developed in this country. The assumption that government borrowing is safe is a very entrenched principle of international banking, which has found their way into Basel around borrowing ratings, for instance. I think in this country, some government institutions are far riskier than a cabbage farm in Andon. We have to be very careful in understanding that fact, and therefore understanding the way that we do our risk weighting in the financial industry. This requires intellectual analysis of the first rate intellectual analysis. And we need to see the Bank of Ghana beginning to lead the conversation in these areas. When you say that some BDC loans should be written off, which has happened, and some of them were obviously exposed to government entities.
And you wind up in a minute.
Good. Are exposed to government entities. It is quite evident, therefore, that those entities are not sovereign in the traditional and conventional sense of the word. They are high risk. So in that kind of scenario, if you are classifying assets in that regard, you have to take into account the fact that some of the Basel III principles, etc., need significant modification to suit our context. How you rate borrowers is not casual. In some areas, in some other jurisdictions where credit referencing is extremely well developed, these are casual matters. How you determine asset quality in a context such as ours requires some degree of innovative thinking relevant to our needs as a unique banking jurisdiction. And we need to see a much more enhanced form of intellectual analysis from the Bank of Ghana in these matters. There is too much copy and paste thinking. Look at some of the directives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so you've been listening to Bright Simmons. We will listen to Ace and Kuma give his take on it also. Bright gives certain understanding that puts the matters in so clear perspectives. with imageries that got Ace, you know. Yes, so Ace.
Let me make a confession.
BOG, Boulders,
yeah,
KPMG, what are they saying? Have been the courses.
I'll try within my 15 minutes.
Okay.
Ignore the New Yorker. The story there, I don't think is very accurate.
I
actually, it was probably yesterday, but it's okay. It's always intimidating to speak after Bright. I read of him being described as frighteningly brilliant, and I think Ghanaians have seen it today. Yeah, this man is a Ghanaian. He's not. I remember the first time I met him. We were at Aspen, trying to become better citizens of the world. But look, somebody discovered an easy way to make money in Ghana, and critically, it is this: take government money and invest with government and make money from government, period. This model was designed, perfected, adapted in various situations. And so you have people who will go to the lender of last resort, take money from the lender of last resort, and simply find ways of investing it with the lender of last resort to make money from the lender of last resort. And this was going on in such a blatant manner that it beggars belief that the central bank did not see. Now, Bright is right. Okay, that rhymes, right? Okay. Yeah, Singapore has 200 banks. Canada has 5 main banks. They have the second tiers. Now, if you're going to distribute banking and financial service licenses like confetti, then you ought to have the wherewithal, the spine, the backbone, the staff, the expertise to monitor them. Singapore, I believe, is still the country that delivers lashes for littering, as some American youth found out. Now, in Ghana, 34 or so banks, 500 MIFs, 80 rural banks. The staff to supervise them must be key, sharp, on top of their game. But what happened? And so if you can't monitor them, you are literally throwing Ghanaians, you are throwing these on the unsuspecting Ghanaian. And as we have found, the Ghanaian will invest wherever he thinks he will make money. And so you must then cut your banks according to the size of your ability to supervise. If you can't supervise 50, you don't give 50. Then you would encourage people to consolidate. How do we supervise? Now, there are yearly banking investigation and examination reports. What are the reports we've read showed us? They were ignored. In one instance, they detected 24 infractions. 24 in 2014. By 2015, the bank had only complied with 4. And yet it retained its license. Some of these blow your mind. Now, so we could not supervise. And there are hints, very broad hints, and I hope the prosecution is able to uncover where the bodies are buried, that some of this sleeping by Bank of Ghana was induced by propofol bought by the banks. That it was deliberate sleeping. They knew what was going on and did nothing. Right, where in the world, let's use Singapore, I love that example, will Piram, R5, DKM, God is great, and their more recent cousins who bear metal names be allowed to operate for so long? And when they are shut down, nobody's prosecuted. In Singapore, you'll be lashed. Nobody, to the best of my knowledge, I may be wrong, is prosecuted. And they have the temerity to continue to operate when the central bank has said stop. Elsewhere, when the central bank says stop and you operate 1 hour, police arrive with handcuffs. And you are carted off immediately. Look at what happened Wall Street, Nigeria. But we have a country where the Bank of Ghana, the central bank, can say that we have reviewed our statutes and we think that these acts are in breach of the law, and the people come and say, make we sleep. And, as they say, poke their finger into the eyes of the central bank. But let's get down to brass tacks and let's go into the comfort of the area of company and issues like that. You see, nobody compels you to form a company. Ghana law doesn't compel you for the most part. You can sell your groundnuts from the top of your head and nobody is going to have a problem with you. You can graduate and put it on the table in front of your house and nobody's going to have a quarrel with you. Now, the rules of sole proprietorship are very simple. You take your money in, you chop your money. You can take any part of the money you have put in the groundnuts for a week and spend all of it. Now, your wahala, nobody cares. After all, you are taxed as an individual. Ghana law will not compel you to operate as a company, for the most part, and I'll get to those instances. But if you choose to become a company, then the rules change. It is no longer a media. The money you put in a company to form the company is not a loan to the company unless it is so described. It is called equity. So you cannot sit down and say that I haven't recovered all my money. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, investing in a company or forming your own company is not like being the only owner of the local football. That when your team is losing, we'll say, ball. Unfortunately, for some of the so-called captains of industry, they have run companies as if they are the ones who provided the football and at any time can take it out. Newsflash. Once you form the company, it becomes another person. You cannot chop and change and chop and eat that person as you deem fit. And some people have said, oh, but it's their company, so if they spend the money. It is like telling us that if you like human meat, you can have 100 children and eat them as and when you please. That is how grotesque and bizarre such an argument sounds. So the company becomes separate. It is not you. The company's car is the company's car. The company's property is the company's property. The company's money is the company's money. It is not yours. What are you entitled to? You're entitled to your dividend, which means that, and the law is clear, dividends can only be paid from the income surplus account. Let me break that down. The company must make profit. And even then, dividend isn't automatic. The board must decide which portion of the profit will be distributed as dividend per share. And then it is paid. And so companies can make profit and decide that, well, look, we have so much work to do, R&D and others coming up. We are not going to distribute any dividend this year. The board can decide that. But of course, if the board tries to do that to hide income, then tax might step in with deemed dividend provisions, etc. But that's another issue. And so as a shareholder, your entitlement is to dividend only when the company has made profit. Of course, if the value of the shares you have purchased, because shares in Ghana are of no par value, so the market determines the value at every material moment. And to the extent that I think par value shares don't make sense anymore. And I think Gawa was right in introducing it in Ghana in 1963. But you can then sell your shares. Newsflash. But nobody is bound to buy your shares. Your fellow shareholders have a right to buy. They don't have an obligation to buy. Based on the terms of your regulations, they might have the preemptive right, the right of first option to purchase. If they don't purchase, you sell to anybody. 2, the company cannot buy your shares back. It is wrong. It's against the law. Now, except under certain, there are severe restrictions, etc., etc. So, and if you're a director of a company, and please, directorship is not for your best friend and your friend from school. It's somebody who is going to add value to it. I got a letter from people I've never met saying that they want to do me the honor of appointing me to their board. So they thought they were honoring me. Well, I turned down the so-called honor and they were a bit cheesed off. But guess what? If I become a director of your company, immediately the law imposes duties on me. Those duties are more onerous than the sandwiches and cakes and tea you serve me at board meetings and the envelope of certain allowances you give to me at the end of the meetings. If I focus on those, I will run this thing to my detriment, my personal detriment. Because the first duty imposed on me is the fiduciary duty. Now, a fiduciary assumes that you are working on behalf of a weaker person. That's the simple the concept of the fiduciary. So because the company is an artificial person and can't speak for itself, a burden is imposed on me, and the first line of that is that I must exercise utmost good faith. Watch the word, utmost, absolute. It is higher than the standard of a reasonable or ordinary person. It is utmost, it is higher than that. I have fiduciary duties. I have good faith duties. I have conflict of interest and conflict of responsibilities. So many. Now, if I breach them, the company can sue me for compensation. So if you're inviting me to serve on your board, I should check it. If I make a mistake, is this company going to sue me? And this is what's worse. The Registrar General can decide that the Registrar General will sue me in the name of the company for my breaches if they cause loss to the companies. And so you must consider all of these in deciding whom you appoint to your board. The person must bring value. And if you're accepting an appointment onto any board, be careful. Because you see, that, and this is the truth, there is a distinction between executive and non-executive directors. To that extent, that statement is right. Now, what's the distinction? The executive director is first and foremost a director who holds an office for profit within the company. The non-executive is only a director. Now, so the executive directors are on the ground. So the managing director is the most typical executive director. Some people become executive chairman, which means the person is the chairman of the board and holds an office for profit. So he receives monthly salaries, etc., etc. But if you are non-executive, you probably attend board meetings once every 3 months. You are given papers, and I've seen this before, ladies and gentlemen. The papers are given to you in the boardroom. You can be given annual audits without notes. Believe me. The audit report that's been given to you is just the figures, no notes. But you will see the note 6. And if you understand these things, you will open to the note section and say, what do these figures mean? Because the auditor is bound to explain all of those in the notes. But the documents are given to you at the meeting. What time do you have to cross-check the figures with the notes so you can ask questions? And of course, once the tea and the coffee and the cakes and croissants are flowing and there's little time, motion to accept the accounts, move. Seconded, all in favor, aye. Recorded, we moved on. There may be dead bodies buried in the audit report and you have no clue. And guess what? When trouble comes, the duty of directors, the law says, Section 179 of Act 179, is to direct and administer the business of the company. Direct and administer the business of the company. Guess what? In their power to direct and administer the business of the company, the board is not even subject to the shareholders whose money form the company. Section 137 to 139. The board can disregard directions of the shareholders if it deals with the business of the company. And so you might be non-executive. You go and you are blinded with these papers and you go home thinking the company is doing well. Then one day, the stink blows up. And at that point, the law will not consider the distinction between you and the one who works for a salary. So be extremely careful when you're accepting these. But like I said, you don't have to form a company. It's just that there are certain businesses that you will not be allowed to participate in unless you are a company. The reason is that the rules of company law has such interesting reporting requirements and duties and obligations, some of which I've explained, which would then provide a better security for the public that you operate in that sector more as a company than as an individual. So nobody will give a banking license to Samsung as Samsung. They will demand that you form a company first. But just back to sole proprietorship. Even with sole proprietorship, there are some businesses you can't engage in without regulation. You can't become a pharmacist overnight. You must get a license. You can't become a doctor overnight. You can't practice law. In fact, specifically, it is an offense to practice law without being enrolled in the role of lawyers. So there are regulations along the line. Now, banking is serious business. And since my school life, I've seen 3. The PNDC Law 225, there's the Act 673, and the more recent Act 930 on the banking sector. There was also the MBFI's law, which has kind of now been made now into the Act 930. Then there are the rules on the Bank of Ghana itself. The banking sector is seriously regulated. And the thing about banking sector is that the law evolves on the basis of scandals. And so when the Enron and other scandals came up, and Sarbanes-Oxley was passed, etc., the rules worldwide began to change. Ghana tried in 2004, but finally came on board, and probably even stronger, in 2016 with Act 930. Now, the same rules in company law, which will not allow a director to act in breach of his duties, even got escalated The concept of the insider was probably for the first time defined in our banking law. That is a director, an executive, whatever. Then the related parties, your wife, your children, your stepson, your uncle, your niece, literally everybody in your line of consanguinity or affinity is drawn into the related person. Which means that as the MD of a bank, I cannot give a job to my wife unless I comply with the rules in Act 930. It must be on sound commercial terms. It must not be most favored. It must be arm's length, fair market value, and I need Bank of Ghana's approval. That's how much the law condescends to particulars to regulate shifting monies through families. So listen, and this is the reality. I cannot hire my daughter as the secretary or my son as the secretary in the bank, literally, unless and until I have filed this with the Bank of Ghana. And what is even more critical, you can't even become a director of a bank until Bank of Ghana has approved. And now when we go through this, Bank of Ghana has questions to answer with some of the people who became directors of some of these banks. Now, if you get into related party transactions, it's a minefield. And if you don't comply with the law, guess what? Every non-compliance with the Banking Act is an offense. And you could go to jail. And so as I read these things, what pops out at me are the various offenses that are committed, at least on the face of these reports. That requires serious police or other investigations. And if they indeed have the evidence for this, then there's trouble down the line. But I also say, as I end, and I'm not sure I've exhausted my 15 minutes, that there may be some people who are genuinely not guilty.
Okay.
And the quicker these matters are resolved, the better it will be. You see, because and as the public may not be privy to all of this, the nuances of the law. Say, hey, but it might not be that a crime has been committed, because when we get to crimes, the standard of proof is different. It's beyond reasonable doubt. And so it is important that some of these things are brought to a closure quickly, so that those who have not committed offenses would not be, subjected to repeated public ridicule, and name calling. And I think Ghanaians have perfected the act of cursing, even when it is not there. That's what I'll call it.
I know the questions there that I'll return to you on. And you've just been listening to Ace Nkrumah. Also, spent 15 minutes giving us his understanding of what has gone into, what these reports collectively seem to suggest. And you may be hearing for the very first time that for one bank, as many as 24 infractions were found. And by 2014, they had only redressed 4, and yet they were in good business. Okay, Doc.
Thank you very much.
Right.
And I think the first 2 submissions have even done the job for me. But the first thing that I want to ask is that I just want you to look at it in IMF report 2011, 11/131. It made all these things that has happened today were actually identified by IMF report. And I want to create your indulgence and tell you, weak licensing, the financial conglomerate which has created financial octopus, IMF report said it. He said about regulatory forbearances and this emergency liquidity support we are battering now. In 2011, the IMF said liquidity emergency support must be properly handled. It never ended. It said the consolidated supervision, which is also something to do with the financial conglomerate, should have also been done. So I ask myself, the question that I have asked myself, what is the Bank of Ghana board governance practices are? That is why you can find 24 infractions in another institution, it was not addressed. Because all these things were identified, and I was expecting the board of Bank of Ghana should address it and clean it, which I don't know how they did it. So we sit here in 2018, and all the things they said has come to pass. Weak licensing regulation. What does it mean? I'm not saying PEPs, politically exposed persons, should not have licenses, but they deserve to have a comprehensive due diligence. What it means that we need to do a comprehensive due diligence. Is he a proper fit person before you give him license? And if you look from 2010 coming, we have over licensed so many licenses, and there's certain that even savings and loans have been upgraded from universal banking. I'll go to what Bright said. Bright made a very solid point about universal banking license. The universal banking license in Ghana was copied from Nigeria. And I want to state it because it was 2001. Nigerians had it. After practicing for 10 years, 2011, they got back and said, hey, we are running something, we are running some dangerous business. So they went back and then, as Bright said, strike re-licensing bank into commercial banking, development banking, merchant bank, each one with its own capital allocation, so that you don't give a blanket check to all the people. Everybody should bring 41 million. I've been saying that we need to have studied it. Like he said, what went into Nigerian practices before they brought it. Unfortunately, we have decided to go 400 million. Fine. But don't forget, the mere fact we are going to create mega banks, it is going to create what we call too big to fail. And that is very dangerous. Let me give you an example. When Citibank had crisis in 2007 and 2008, do you believe that they were bailed over 200 billion US dollars? 200 billion because if Citibank has collapsed, the whole American economy would have been in trouble. And I'm imagining if we create these elephants that we want to the mega banks, and 5 of them begin to go, what will happen? The bailout will be far more exceedingly above than what we have done today. So I'm just sending a caution to them. In as much as we want to create this big one, we also might be mindful that the consequences to come will be difficult. Liquidity emergency support. Everybody is clamoring. Previously, we called it LOLR, lender of last resort. After the financial crisis, the IMF and the World Bank has come with good names. They're always very good. Today, we have emergency liquidity support. And as far back as 2009 and 2010, the IMF report, which is in front, which I have, told Bank of Ghana, be very careful and be very prudent in giving this support, because they saw that some of these monies could even not go to support the business. What did they do? What did the board do? So my argument now, central bank must also sit up, because who reviews all the IMF report? I have reviewed all the IMF report from 2008 to 2018. I can tell you whatever. And there are certain things Bank of Ghana is supposed to address. But if you don't clean your house, how can you go and clean somebody? That's why the 24 infractions were not done. So that is it. Now I go to the regulation. We know I said it here last week that we seem to have a multiple regulation. And in multiple regulation, what it does is that it creates regulatory arbitrages. If you cannot do it in banking, you can do it in asset management. If you can't do it in asset management, you can do it in pension. But you see, the seismic risk for the financial stability is, if it happened to insurance, it can happen to everybody. When you were making your submission, you said there is a withdrawal panic and some of them have gone. Because the financial system, inclusive of banks, when we talk about insurance, pension, and those SEC people, they're all one. But it seems that we have fragmented it. So we need to look at our regulation. And I'm happy that somebody said the last time, Professor Boxing said that government is now looking, the earlier they look at it, because there is no even coordination. You see, if you're doing multiple regulation, there's strong edge to have coordination, meetings regularly, to tell you what is happening in the SEC business, what is happening in pension. Unfortunately, whether they meet here or not, I don't know, but they don't meet. Because when one insurance company gives a guarantee, I forgot, I won't mention the company, it became something. When it went to central bank, they said, well, what can insurance company do? Because they don't even need to discuss the seismic risk in the financial system. So I'm saying that a time has come. Bank of Ghana should sit up. The finance minister should come out clear. The earlier we do it, after all, in England used to have the FSA system. South Africa used to have the multiple system. Kenya, as I'm speaking to you, is migrating into the twin peak approach, where you have one unit, NPRA, the Prudential Regulatory Authority, whose love is to license everybody. And so they know the nuances of licensing, and they understand. Today you hear one is saying capital will go to 2.5 million. The other one is without actually thinking about it. So I believe, way forward, we should look at it. Now let me come back to what I have to do. What has brought us this far? I think I can add it, I can say about 3 or 4. Number one, there has been serious corporate governance breaches. Yesterday, I saw one chairman, board chairman, chairing subcommittees. It is incredible. In the scheme of good corporate governances, the board chairman do not chair any other subcommittee.
Actually, it's expressly provided.
Unfortunately, one of the things that you release, one chairman is chairing the loans and advances committee. He is chairing the risk committee, and he is chairing the audit subcommittee. That is incredible. But why have we allowed all these things to go on? We go there to review it, isn't it? Somebody goes to review the practices. So didn't they have eye? That is why I'm making inference that the central bank people should also be brought to book. I like what Dr. Addison said recently. That said a code of practices for people, code of ethics for them. That is not enough. As far as I'm concerned, definition of staff, what does it mean? Does it mean ex-staff? We should come clear. If we want to get to the bottom of this, we should not shield anybody. We should not. If I have retired, what will happen to me? And I have created something before I left. So I want him to come clear. Maybe he can't come clear. Those who are in investigation should move the ball back and see all those who allow these things to slip through. Because it slipped through. If we have cut our losses earlier, we won't have what we have. Now, concentrated ownership. In this country, well, unfortunately, we have concentrated ownership. And don't forget, the lawyers will tell you that the concentrated ownership in Ghana, it allows them to appoint the board, isn't it? Mm-hmm. That's right. But you see, we have Bank of Ghana who could have said that this and this guy does not qualify. There are criteria for board appointment. And as is said, the Bank of Ghana is to make sure that those who don't call are disqualified. I'm sorry, when I said here that I am a good preacher man, I have no banking experience. I have no banking skill. I have no financial background. I just go there, and he said it here. Somebody said he begged him to be a board member. And he said he knew the implication. Said, for me, I won't go. And let me use myself. One of the banks, when I retired, wanted me to, I look at the bank and I look at the people. They say, thank you, I don't want to be a board. Because I knew that in future I can destroy my name. So when somebody is coming, Bank of Ghana is supposed to say, you put a break. But unfortunately, they also sat there. People come and go. And they go and then create mess. Create share liquidity support, emergency liquidity support, and even give 27.6 billion as promotion. Ah, Jesus Christ.
No, the promotion to Bank of Ghana.
I don't know.
oh no, the report said, I'm telling you, the report says that money was distributed to Bank of Ghana staff.
Thank you for correction.
That is where the dead bodies are buried.
Thank you for correction. Thank you, Ace. How can you you sit down there, you are giving somebody support to survive, and then he take part of the portion of the money and come and give you call it promotion. What did you do to do that? So I'm saying that Bank of Ghana should look at it. Now, unqualified people and unqualified people sitting on the board. Yes, men, we call them board captures. They are passive board, they are board captures. Before you go there, they have told you what they want you to say. And when you go there, as I was in a meeting, you know what happened? They said, as the MD was saying. The chairman will not even come with, as a chairman or a board, you have a strategic direction. But they won't bring any strategy. So when the MD wants to pilot the plane, everybody says, oh, as the MD was saying. And the MD is, as he said, an executive. He wants to benefit from the bonus scheme and the bonuses and everything. So he will lead you into grave.
I see.
Yes, my brother, I've been there before. Whatever I'm saying here, that has influenced me to do my PhD. When I work in a certain bank as a board level, that is where I encounter these things. And it's incredible. Insider and connected lending. It is a normal thing. Brambridge and Brambridge 1998, a write-up on our research. He said the major cause of local banks' failure in Africa is the connected and insider lending. It is an article, it is published. Martin Brambridge. Because an African create a business, as it said, my sister, daughter, my brother, we are not saying don't do that, but let it pass through a due process and pass the test. Unfortunately, in Ghana, it doesn't. Then we create financial conglomerate. Oh, IMF said this 2011. It said Ghanaians, a Bank of Ghana, be aware of the financial conglomerates and business companies. Because if you don't have what you call shareholders mapping, directors mapping, what it means is that you map to find cross directorship. Unfortunately, they said it and it was not done. So one person in this country have 30 companies and the bank is the center. And he's milking the bank left and right. So didn't they have the report over there? That's why I'm so angry. Now, consolidated subdivision. Consolidated subdivision means that when you create the financial conglomerate, you should have a consolidated inspection and audit. So the new law says even capital adequacy, we have consolidated capital adequacy. So, my brother, this is what has happened. Let me go to the last one because I think I've taken time. Regulatory infractions. Another area. I'm going to give you the details of the infractions because all these things are coming from IMF, not me.
Do it quick.
Quick. Failure of Bank of Ghana to comply with the Basel II. IFRS. Failure to do proper fake tests on Ghanaian shareholders, on directors. Over-licensing of bank, upgrading of banks. Regulatory forbearances, uneven supervision, and inadequate enforcement. Let me repeat here. Inadequate, we have, like I think Ace said it in his delivery at that conference, said we have all the laws. What is led is that we need people who are strong and bold, who knows what they are doing to enforce it, not mediocrity. Ghana, we enjoy importing mediocrity, placing them there. When they go there, they sing the chorus song, they don't do the job. He said that. What about failure to ensure corporate governance? IMF said in 2011. So I'm saying these are the things. And we need, as a nation, way forward, we need to address it. Although they are trying to address it. Right. But I'm not worried about the directives that have come. I'm only praying that the word enforcement will be part of the new regulation. Okay. And people should be sanctioned properly. And people should not be shifted like we've been transferred from one department to another department. Because now look at 8 billion. We are counting it. We haven't finished. We are counting it. We'll possibly get to 12, maybe. And then it will be something we couldn't even support in our capex. We'll use to people to dissipate it. And we want to
so the debt,
right. So that's Dr. Richmond Etuahine also giving us his perspective of the development from the point of view, more particularly of the IMF and its recommendations that it says were ignored. But we definitely know that the Bank of Ghana had a feeling that there was too much interference from the IMF, and because of this, some of the warnings, they simply ignored it. Were they able to ignore also the political interference as well? And the problems that he speaks about, poor supervision and even in accrediting or approving members of these boards. We will take a break here. When we return, there are follow-up questions on the submissions that these gentlemen have made. We'll be right back.